What makes video games so addicting? Is it the fun factor and gameplay? Is it how well written these games are? As someone who's been playing games for as long as I can remember, I'd say it's almost impossible to answer these questions. After all, the games I enjoy won't necessarily be the ones you enjoy. We all have a different take on these games. No doubt there are many games whose goal is to make you question your actions. But I can only talk about the ones that got a genuine response from me. For example, Undertale is pretty much the poster boy of subverting expectations and making the player question their actions. But it never affected me that much. Maybe if I'd been younger. Honestly, the only thing I can do to share my side of the story is to talk about how these experiences shaped me. Not just as a player, but as someone who generally wanted to do the right thing. Oh, and just so we're clear, this is going to include spoilers, okay? Don't come crying after and say I didn't warn you. Let's start with a game that kept me up at night long after I finished it. Demon's Souls. Nope, I'm not talking about the 2020 remake. This was the 2009 release, which I got to play around Christmas that year. At this point, you've had numerous sequels and spiritual successors, but this was a time when there was no such thing as a Souls-like. It wasn't until Dark Souls' release that the genre really hit its stride. Demon's Souls was a different beast though. It started off incredibly oppressive, but it had an oddly peaceful atmosphere once you got used to it. It was desolate, but I started to feel more and more at home as I played. That was until I came across the Valley of Defilement. The Valley of Defilement was an exercise in frustration, but it also chilled me to the bone. The term defilement is right. Blood, guts, and every filthy thing you can think of ran through this place. Even the enemies here felt different. They really wanted to take me out, even if it meant they'd plummet into the abyss below. I'll never forget how my first playthrough went. There were sections of the valley that killed me over and over and over. Of course, I kept at it, but eventually I started to see red. I wanted to kill everything in this place. I went out of my way to make sure nothing was alive. As I worked my way through, I began to look forward to the inevitable boss fight. I wanted to make this boss feel every bit of pent-up frustration I had. I wanted to make them pay. I'd adjusted to the difficulty of this place, and I started to look forward to a bloody fight ahead. I wasn't given that fight. Instead, it was a woman, Saint Estrella, begging me not to come any closer.
Leave us, Slayer of Demons. Leave us.
She asked me to leave her and the denizens of this place alone. At this point, I was hardly listening, but part of me did hesitate. Eventually, I came across Estrella's companion and bodyguard, Garl Vinland. My reflexes were honed to a razor's edge, so I wasn't worried. I then realized we were surrounded by what looked to be a sea of babies and blood. Yeah, you heard that right. Babies and blood. The nightmares after weren't great. That said, I was still seething and wanted to fight. So I took Garl out like he was nothing. Step by bloody step, I looked forward to my fight with Estrella. I was expecting her to transform into some monstrosity and we'd have our big fight. But instead, she was disappointed in me. She asked me if all this was really worth the demon's soul inside her, and she gave up. She crushed my desire for a boss fight by taking herself out. The fight in me died as soon as she did. I wondered what it was for, and I realized that the denizens of the valley were protecting this person from me. This was the very first time I felt repulsed at my actions playing a game. It was at this point that I began to realize that yes, I was the bad guy here. It didn't help that Saint Estrella's musical theme was heart-wrenching. Demon's Souls is one of those games that still hold up incredibly well today. If you're interested in playing and you've got yourself a PS5, however, you might want to go for the remake instead. Personally, I haven't touched the game since I finished it because it had that much of an effect on me. The next game we need to talk about? Shadow of the Colossus. Demon's Souls was released quite a while back, but we are going to turn back the clock a few more years to a time when I was still playing my PS2 regularly. At this point, Shadow of the Colossus had just released, and it pretty much blew everyone away. In all honesty, I felt as though no other game could look as good as Shadow of the Colossus did, at least not until the release of the PlayStation 3. You start the game dashing into this world with your trusty steed, Agro, and immediately it feels as though you aren't supposed to be here. It's almost like you've stepped into the pages of a fairy tale unannounced, and you aren't sure why everyone seems to want you out. The game doesn't hold your hand, but a little bit of problem solving can go a long way. You'll eventually feel your way around to the point where you reach your first Colossus. If you haven't yet played the game, I honestly envy you, because it's an absolute spectacle. It's up to you to take down a behemoth of a creature, many times your size. The thing is, instead of feeling as though I did something incredible when I finally took it down, I felt a tinge of regret instead. Why was I doing this? Of course, the game tries to show you some kind of end goal in the form of a sleeping figure. At least I thought she was sleeping. It could be argued that this person has recently departed. Your character, Wander, seems to want to give life back to this person, which is why he's taken on this monumental task. But why does it feel like you're doing something awful in the process? Shadow of the Colossus was an incredible experience, start to finish, but there was always this nagging voice in the back of my mind. Each Colossus was more majestic than the last, and the more of them I took down, the worse I felt. The thing is, once you've passed a certain point, you end up wanting to see things through. Even if I still felt bad, I became so invested that I wanted to see what would happen next. Finally, during the game's climax, it felt as though nature itself was punishing me for my actions. What I was doing was unnatural, because I wanted something that I was never supposed to get. Somehow, I managed to accomplish my task, but at what cost? The interesting thing about Shadow of the Colossus is how it leaves so many things open to interpretation. Let's finish off with Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. I would definitely put Knights of the Old Republic on my personal list of top 10 greatest games of all time, and it's the very best Star Wars game I've ever played. This was BioWare at their best, in my opinion. Of course, I've got rose-tinted glasses, since I was still quite young, but it pretty much had everything I could possibly want out of a Star Wars game. To me, this was the closest a Star Wars game got to an actual movie. In fact, I would say that Knights of the Old Republic is like the original trilogy bundled into one. I believe during an interview, one of the developers stated that they did everything they set out to accomplish with this game, and it shows. I'll have to warn again that there are spoilers, okay? I can't talk about how this game managed to get me to question my actions without spoiling the biggest twist, even if some people saw that twist coming a mile away. In my defense, I was still a kid. In a nutshell, the plot of the game revolves around you and your party going after the primary antagonist, Darth Malak, to stop him in his quest to eradicate the Jedi and the Republic. Darth Malak was once the apprentice of Darth Revan, who was the reason why the Sith army had managed to do so well up until this point. In a very Star Wars move, the apprentice turned against the master, seemingly killing him. Up until this point, I've done everything I can to uphold a certain moral standard. I wanted to be the best I could be, and I always chose to help people whenever possible. That was until they told me I was playing as Revan this whole time. That meant everything about my character was a lie, and the Jedi Council manipulated me to get me to fight for them. Even as a kid, I felt the sting of this revelation. I believed in what the Jedi stood for, and I tried to be as selfless as possible. But the fact that they were willing to do this made them no better than the Sith, in my opinion. It changed the way I played. I wasn't afraid to speak out against both good and evil at this point, because everything started to feel like shades of gray instead. It honestly made me feel complete, which I imagine was what Revan was feeling as well. The fact that you actually could go for a dark side playthrough made this revelation all the more cathartic. As far as I'm concerned, this was Star Wars storytelling at its best. There you have it, 3 games that, in my opinion, have managed to transcend the scope of gaming, forcing me to confront parts of myself to finish them. As far as the timing goes, the 2000s were an era when I was most susceptible to what gaming had to offer, which is likely why it affected me as much as it did. In my opinion, video games offer a complete experience you won't find anywhere else. Bye now.